And everyone will go, yay! It's Seth Godin, and this is the Ryan Holtz podcast. I had Richard Branson.
Oh,
Richard
yeah.
he had a cold. And he was terrible. He did nothing to make my life better.
Is he intentionally trying to roast the interviewer, or is he, kind of doing it subliminally? Because it's so smooth.
Don't start a podcast if you're not prepared to get to episode 100 before something good happens. Episodes, I've never had a guest. I never will have a guest.
Yes.
Because I think that podcasts with guests are great. I disagree with you. All right.
I'm saying it in a good way. Yes.
And what you've got here is Ryan's show, and sometimes the guest gets a word in edgewise. And that's great. I like that better. Because that's why someone should listen to your podcast, because it's yours.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Ryan Holtz Show podcast. If you've already not left a 5-star review on iTunes, please do so. And if you would like to watch this interview with my next guest, please go to youtube.com/Ryan Holtz. But today I have what I would like to call the OG of marketing, the Godfather of marketing. And it's so funny because I'm an avid follower of Seth's blog. And I said, I really want to read live his current blog post from this morning. So yesterday I went to bed and I said, Seth, please don't write a long blog post for tomorrow morning. And bingo, we have the blog post ready to go. Before I get into Seth's bio, I am going to read the blog post from this morning. I absolutely love it. I think it's great. And it's titled Whining. It says, toddlers whine. Most adults figure out how to lose the habit because it's toxic, and yet it persists. Whining is a seductive package deal. When it works, it gets us attention, it lowers expectations, it gains sympathy, and it forces people to identify with our pain, and it helps people feel as though they're not responsible. Often the amount of whining is totally unrelated to the level of discomfort, and it seems to increase with how much privilege people perceive they deserve. So why avoid it? Because it changes our outlook on the world. When whining becomes a habit, we need to continue it. So we begin to interpret events as opportunities to prove our whining is justified. And because over time, people hate being around a whiner, the selfish desires of the habitual whiner eventually become clear. We realize that our shared reality is the world as it is, and that the whiner isn't actually being singled out. And through practice, we learn that the best way to make things better is to work to improve them, not to demand special treatment. Reminding myself of the perils of whining is helpful indeed. Optimists run the risk of being disappointment now and then. Whiners are always disappointing. As an avid follower of your blog, Seth, I wanted to ask you, what is the inspiration when you wake up in the morning and you write these blogs? How do these topics just kind of come into mind? And specifically with the one that came out this morning, what's just the mini story behind it?
Well, I write my blog because it's a privilege. It helps me at least as much as it helps the people who read it. I've been doing it as a habit for 20 years, and having a streak matters a lot, because knowing that there's going to be a blog post tomorrow, not having to decide if there's going to be a blog post tomorrow, that's key. That changes everything. And I strongly suggest whatever it is that you do, you figure out how to build streaks into it. My new book, The Practice, is about inspiration and creativity. I do not believe that inspiration arrives. I do not believe in the muse. I do not believe it's a gift. I think it's effort. Just like selling is effort, just like shoveling the snow on your walk is effort. If you set out to do it, you will do it. And in the case of my blog, if I see something in the world that I don't understand, I try to make an assertion so I can explain it. If I see behaviors in the world that don't make sense or need to be named, I try to name them or have them make sense. So basically it's a map, it's an almanac, it's a chance to put something into the world that may or may not work for other people, and then I learn from that process. In this case, I think all of us can imagine that there are whiners in our lives. Some of them are famous people we don't know. Some of them are people we work with. Some of them are us. And I think that once we label somebody a whiner, it's much easier to deal with them, because we now don't say, oh, they're reporting the truth. We say, oh, this is their habit.
Very interesting. And Seth, welcome to the show, by the way.
Thanks, Ryan. Happy to dive right in, but I forgot to say thanks for having me.
No, we dove right in. It's really interesting how timing works. I mean, I literally emailed you a year and a half, 2 years ago. I said, Seth, I'd love to have you come on the podcast. You said, hey, Ryan, I love you, man, but I'm not doing podcasts at this point. And I seen you going around, you know, and chatting with multiple people and hosts and stuff like that about your new book, which we'll get into. And I said, well, it's time to go back at Seth. I love the fact that, you know, somebody who's got the accomplishments and accolades as you do, and also just the worldwide impact, you know, when you email you, I'm emailing you. Like, I'm not getting an assistant. I'm not getting an automated. I'm not getting a virtual assistant, you know, and the first time I ever emailed you and you got back to me, I kind of looked at the email for a quick 2 seconds and I'm like, I think this is him actually emailing me back, just the way it was typed out. How have you managed to maintain that, I guess, you know, kind of, you know, on the ground, I'll call it access with, you know, the amount of replies, the amount of messages, the amount of social media that you got going on in your world?
Well, first, I'm asking people not to email me unless they have a really good reason. But second, I don't have a staff. I don't have any employees at all. Every word you read from me, I wrote. And it's a privilege. It's a treat. And I value it highly. I don't use Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. And I don't watch television, and I don't go to meetings. So right there, I've got 7 hours free that most people don't have. And I will admit that the fact that I've answered 175,000 emails myself over the years is a bad habit, because it distracts me from things that are more scary. But it is one that pays dividends because I got to meet you. And so for every 20 spammers I have to plow through, that is worth it. On the other hand, I hate being hustled. I think everyone hates being hustled.
Yes.
And I just don't even bother answering people who are hustling me for something anymore.
You know what? And it's interesting too, because I call it like a first date when you're reaching out to somebody for a guest. There's a certain kind of, you know, symbiotic, I call it symbiotic. I'm a big energy person, and I feel even when I'm typing, I still feel like the energy can go through that key into the other person. And some people call me crazy for it. And I'm like, no, because I think it's the intention in which I'm typing with. And I think that sometimes people can pick that up on the other end. At least I hope. But with you, I just think it's absolutely marvelous. Is it true? And I wanted to ask you this. Can you still play the clarinet?
Well, I don't know what that means by play. Can I make noise come out of it?
Yes. Yeah. So how did the clarinet, how long have you been playing that for?
Well, so I don't know if you saw my TED Talk on this or not.
I didn't see the TED Talk on that one, no.
Okay, the TED Talk's only 3 minutes long. And I get up on stage. This is the main stage at TED. This is Big Deal TED.
Big Deal TED.
And I get up on stage, and the way the TED Talk works is I am assembling the clarinet while I am talking about the fact that even though I took lessons for 8 years, I never played the clarinet. I had never once played a note that was worth listening to. And my rant is about the fact that for kids and adults, we're constantly saying, add more, learn more songs, learn more notes. You got a restaurant, put more stuff on the menu. You got a podcast, make more episodes. But we don't say to people, why don't you just do one thing that's worth listening to? No one ever said to me, let's not learn any more songs or any more notes. Let's just play a C in a way that sounds like it's supposed to. And there's more to the talk than that. But then at the end of the talk, I say thank you and I leave. And I don't play the clarinet because that's the point. The point is that I never decided to invest enough of myself actually be good at it. And if you're not going to invest enough to get through that dip, don't start. Don't keep hacking at it. And it created a lot of tension in the room because the culture says that what I'm supposed to do at the end of 3 minutes is go, and everyone will go, yay! But that's not really my point. My point is we got to quit a lot of things so that we can set ourselves up to do a thing that we can point to and say, this. I don't tweet, I don't use Facebook, but my blog, that's the one.
Mm. You know, Seth, this interview is very personal for me because, you know, when I started my first business at 24, I'm 36 now, and I own a marketing agency. And I remember back then, you know, I'd always look for content, and I, you know, because I wanted to learn, and I said, you know, who's some really great peers in this industry that have, you know, kind of trailblazed the road. And you came up, and it was hard to find you in the sense that there was so much garbage and noise in this industry. And then I found my beautiful Seth Godin, and I said, finally, somebody who can just calm everything down and explain things in a way that just makes sense, you know, and hashtag hustle porn, you know, everybody's about this hustle. And I know that's something you're adamantly against, and you're like, no. Like, let's just relax off the hustle. My question to you is 800 rejection letters, you know, getting started in the book business. And you've been asked this question a lot, but I think it's something that people need to hear. And I love my audience to hear is that, how do you keep going? You brought up cognitive behavioral therapy several times as a way that you've used to say, hey, you know what, when that voice starts coming into my brain of kind of negativity, and, you know, this is how I've managed to get over that hump. What people seem to not understand still in 2020, if not more, with the instant gratification, you know, of social media and shopping and all that, is the time it takes and the patience it takes. And, you know, could you just speak to how do you get through 800 rejection letters to become a 19-book best-selling author? Huge.
Okay, so the first thing I need to explain is this. The people in the book business in the 80s and 90s, they had a problem, which is they didn't have enough books. And I wasn't spamming anybody when I was pitching books. It was their job for me to send them book proposals. That is totally different than calling people at home out of the phone book and trying to sell them a car, cold call. I don't think that cold calling makes any sense for almost anybody. So I wasn't cold calling anybody. So I was doing these 800 rejection letters, each time earning insight and learning and getting thank yous from the editors who would say, this book isn't going to work for us, but thank you for thinking of us. And they meant it, because they knew that one day I was going to have something that they wanted. And that, I think, is key, because too often people associate the hustle and the rejection. And I don't like this whole rejection Olympics thing where people make videos of like going to Krispy Kreme and offending the person behind the counter because they're asking for some, like, that person's getting minimum wage. Give them a break, right? That's not what this is about. And so I was able to process the no's as no for now, as what you brought them wasn't you brought them a book idea. The book idea you brought them wasn't as good as it could have been, and it wasn't as appropriate for them as it should have been. But what did you learn? And I can tell you that the book that I sold after that year, which was Professor Herb Barnes' On the Spot and Stain Removal Guide, was appropriate and ended up in its second incarnation selling 100,000 copies because it was the right book for the right publisher in the right way. And my name was not on it, right? Because this wasn't about my ego. This was, how can I serve a book publisher and a reader and an author by bringing them together in a way that they'll say thank you. Right? And so I kept turning it to generosity. It was never, where's my commission in this? It was always, how can I solve a problem so that people will say thank you when we're done?
That's huge. That's huge. And for everybody listening, I hope you heard that. That's huge. You're basically giving without the expectation, you know, and I think that's something that's extremely powerful. And that's a long game advantage. Fast forward into the practice. Very interesting. I like the writing. It's interesting because I think maybe, you know, and I've read, Purple Cow, one of my all times. When I think about the practice, it's interesting because you talk a lot about work and shipping the work to get better. So can we dive into this concept? Because a lot of people say, Well, it has to be perfect. I got to ship great work. It has to be perfect before I can ship it. And I watched an interview you did, and you made such a fascinating point, and you said, how can you say you suck at something when you haven't even, put 2,000 hours into it or 3,000 hours into it? And you said, for you to come out and say, hey, I put up 5 podcast episodes and I'm really terrible at it. You're like, you just can't do that at that point. Like, you need to put out massive amounts of content so that, you can actually invite people to help you get better. So can you talk a little bit about the practice and where this came into fruition? And I wanted to ask you, when you write a book, Seth, is there any books where you write where you're like, I can actually pinpoint the moment, date, and time in which I got the inspiration to write this book? Or is it a combination of many moments?
Okay, so those are 2 questions.
Yes. I usually ask 6 questions. Sorry. 6-part questions.
You're ahead of the game. So if someone is listening to this podcast, it means they have a job where someone doesn't tell them what to do all day. It means that you have a job where you are given the freedom to find new ways to solve interesting problems. Because if you have a job where you're told what to do all day, so you're the fry cook at McDonald's, you don't get to make any decisions whatsoever. For the people who are lucky enough to do work where there is freedom, the reason we get freedom is because our job is to solve interesting problems. And that means we have to ship creative work, because creative means you've solved an interesting problem. Shipping means you've put it into the world. You haven't just thought about it. And work, because you do it because it's your job, not because you feel like it, not because you're inspired, but because you said you would. The book about shipping creative work. And what I have discovered through the years is I can talk about all the strategy and tactics I want, but if people aren't emotionally committed to shipping creative work, nothing's going to happen, right? So Purple Cow has sold millions of copies, but the number of people who have used it to make something actually remarkable and brought it to the world is very small. Because sooner or later, we sabotage ourselves. We hold back. We become perfectionists. We dumb it down. We make it stupid. We sabotage everything. And so I've been thinking about and talking about these issues for years and years. And 3 years ago, I said, I'm going to make a workshop about this, the creative workshop. And it took me more than a year of working on it every day to make it. The workshop's going to launch again at Akimbo in a few weeks. And the Creators Workshop ended up being 500 people who came together every day for 100 days online. They gave and got more than 500 pieces of feedback per person over the course of that workshop. More feedback than they had ever gotten in their whole lives. And watching this happen, seeing what worked with people, seeing what didn't work with people, I'm busy taking notes because this is like most authors don't get this privilege. What's working? And as I worked my way through the workshop, I'm like, well, I have to share this with more people. So that's why it became a book.
Unbelievable. Wow. It's great. It's great. So it's, kind of going into, in New York, kind of where you started, you keep there's not a lot of personal information about you, Seth. And I've heard other interviewers, and it's funny. And I love when you kind of, you do a good job of roasting interviewers too, and you do it live. It is interesting. And when you get a question, and I often ask myself, I'm like, is he intentionally trying to roast the interviewer, or is he, kind of doing it subliminally? Because it's so smooth. But every time an interviewer kind of cracks at you on the personal side of things, you said, hey, my personal side is kind of my personal side. I'm not here to chat with my personal side. You talk on the business side a lot. Is there a strategy behind that? Is that just kind of your moral compass, Seth, kind of going through your journey? It's just a question I'd like to ask, only because a lot of people still to this day, they say, hey, Ryan, should I keep my business separate from my personal
Sure.
separate from my business? So I'm not asking about your personal. I'm just kind of asking the reason behind the separate. Yeah.
I don't usually seek to roast anybody. So if it comes across that I am, that's just maybe my New Yorker instinct. It's not, judging from your accent, you're from Toronto?
You're hurting my feelings. I'm from just outside of Vancouver on the west side of Canada,
okay.
but I'm based in Edmonton. I got the Canadian.
You got a little Canadian thing. So I grew up north of Toronto every summer, and the Canadian in me really doesn't want to roast anybody. So I'm sorry if that's coming across. Here's the decision that I made. It's really good for the ego to say that you have a special sauce, that your personal experience informs your unique magic ability to do X, Y, or Z. And social media just rewards that over and over again. That's what everybody wants to talk about. And it's a trap. The reason it's a trap is because if you didn't have parents like mine, you say, well, I didn't have parents like his. And if you didn't have this and this and this and this, you're off the hook. And so what I've chosen to do is I'll use a personal story if I think it opens the door for someone to imagine that they can go forward. But I have disciplined myself not to talk about the personal stuff just because I like hearing about my life, because it doesn't help other people realize they have as many levers available to them as I do. They're just different levers.
Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I like that a lot. Practice. What would you say for you is kind of the core takeaway that you do want, everybody to leave, be left with after reading the book, just in kind of layman's terms, where you're saying, hey, when you read this book, I'm hoping that, ultimately you can work yourself to the desired outcome of this. Do you have that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, most people should not read this book. I've only sold books to 1% of the people in North America, and that's plenty. So 99% of the people, if you've got a cog job, if you're happy where you are, if you are in the right place at the right time, this will not be a helpful disruption for you. But for people who think they have something inside of them that needs to come to the world, who have a voice that they want to share, who would like to trust themselves more, what I'm hoping will happen is not that this will inspire you, because inspiration doesn't last very long. I'm hoping that this will help you develop a discipline, a practice, a daily or weekly approach to the generous work you seek to do. Because if you do that, it is certain everything will work better than if you don't.
Interesting. On the marketing side of everything, a marketer, marketing is an interesting spot. If I take my everyday kind of life dealing with clients, because I do client service, and we come up with beautiful, bright ideas and campaigns for our beloved clients that we so love, and then we take that to them, and then they just crash it and say, I don't like it, it's not going to work, this and that. I've always been conflicted of marketing in the sense of client work, because I love marketing, but I love the process. I love the creativity of it. And it was a desire to even open a podcast, because I said, I want to take this thing from cradle to grave and not have any, money or opinion say, don't like this, don't like that. I want to ship it in its full capacity. For you, I've heard you say in multiple interviews previously that, you don't really market for clients. It's not something you've said that, and I don't know if this is still true, but how could you speak to somebody who says, Seth, I love marketing, but I don't necessarily want to market for other people? What would be some entries into marketing that they could do to still make a living, if that makes sense?
Okay. So I have never done one day of consulting. I have no client. But marketing isn't consulting. You do a certain kind of marketing, but there's lots of kinds of marketing. If you're a fundraiser for the United Way, you're doing marketing. If you're a car designer at Polestar, you're doing marketing, because the design of the car is a marketing decision. If you are trying to help people understand the impact of shale oil on carbon, you're a marketer, because you are telling a story to people that is either going to resonate with them or not. So marketing isn't advertising. Marketing isn't hustle or hype. Marketing is making things better by making better things. It is telling true stories to people who want to hear them. Doing work that other people talk about. That's marketing. And we need a different name for that other stuff, right? We should call it advertising or promotion or hype or whatever subset someone's in. but marketing is anything that touches the market.
100%. 100%. You do several interviews. I went to your site and I love the fact that you actually list the interviews in the podcast. And I said to myself, I think he's got one of the world's largest blogs, no doubt. The 800 rejections, I think that's got to be in some Guinness book of just wow. But then I also thought, guest appearances on podcasts, my goodness. Like I was scrolling and I stopped scrolling. I was like, okay, I get it. I know, I've seen a ton. I did not realize how many podcasts, though, specifically podcast style interviews you've done. What would you say to people now, because podcasting has kind of became a little sexy and everybody's starting a podcast, and we know over 90% of podcasts, they don't even make it past episode 7 half the time. So what would you say to people saying, hey, when you're getting onto that new shiny thing such as podcasting, from your perspective as of kind of going on podcasts, what would you say to people who are looking to maybe go into that and start their own podcast, especially with securing guests and actually giving somewhat of a decent interview?
Yeah. All right. So Alex De Palma, who produces my podcast, and I run the podcasting workshop, and so it is a community of people for 30 days all about this question. The short answers are: don't start a podcast if you're not prepared to get to episode 100 before something good happens. It's the first 100 episodes. Like every podcast, including mine, started with no listeners. That's got to be true, right? Yes. So you're in the void, and that's part of the deal. That one of the best reasons to make a podcast is not because you're going to get listeners. It's because you're going to cogently express yourself.
Interesting. Number
2 is if you decide to do a podcast with guests, which is a crapshoot in and of itself, because A, you have to get guests, and B, most guests aren't good at being interviewed. It's a ladder. And what we take people through in the workshop is, who is somebody who you can get on the podcast tomorrow with an instant yes, like your brother-in-law? Right? So that's the first guess.
Yeah.
And who is the guest that you dream of getting? And then we say, in between those two people, what's the ladder where each person will look at who you've already gotten and say yes, to work your way all the way up? Because too many people say, I'm going to get my brother-in-law, and then next week Oprah's going to be a guest, or Obama's. And they skipped the 80 guests that they would need to get in between.
Yes.
And if you can't draw that ladder, you probably don't have the discipline to start a podcast.
Interesting.
And in my case, I'm up to 150 episodes. I've never had a guest. I never will have a guest.
Yes.
Because I think that podcasts with guests are great, but I also think that owning the whole deal and doing it without guests puts you on the hook in a much bigger way.
Interesting. Okay. Ooh, Seth. I feel like Seth is, I feel like you went at me with that. That's a big one. No. I'm saying it in a good...
I disagree with you. All right?
I'm saying it in a good way, though, Seth. I'm saying it in a good way. I like to poke gently fun in a fun way.
Because the thing is, many podcasts with guests, they basically point the microphone at the guests and let them talk.
Yes.
And what you've got here is Ryan's show, and sometimes the guest gets a word in edgewise. And that's great. I like that better. Because that's why someone should listen to your podcast, because it's yours.
Yes.
And, so my approach is I don't do any podcasts that haven't had at least 100 episodes.
Yes.
And I don't actually believe any longer that this is a good way to sell books or get people to take an action in terms of how much time it takes. I'm doing it to honor the podcaster. So if a podcaster is on a journey that I admire and they have shown up with resilience and generosity, I'm way more likely to consider it than if they're after a hustle.
How do you know that, Seth? So your filter system, when somebody reaches out to you, you're just going quick and checking out, hey, how many episodes they got? Do you have, you said you don't have a team, so it's you going in and just doing a quick little, audit inventory, or is it just a gut feeling that you have after getting hit up so many times and doing so many podcasts?
Oh, you can tell.
Yeah.
When someone shows up asking me to blurb a book, and they've pre-written the blurb for me, and they're telling me how much I'm going to benefit from it. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're hustling me here. You're trading favors. I'm not interested.
Yes.
And so over time, and there's all sorts of topics that I don't feel any comfort or confidence to talk about. So just because someone may know my name doesn't mean I belong on that podcast. So
100%
say no, thank you. And I'm about to take 6 months off from podcasts because I did a whole bunch.
Yeah.
So I don't want to raise anybody's expectations, but the purpose of a podcast isn't to make money, because the chances you're going to make money are very low. The purpose of the podcast is to earn trust. That trust gives you leverage. That trust helps you change people's minds. That trust opens doors. And you can tell when that's the purpose of a podcast. And I think that we've had thousands of people graduate from the podcasting workshop, and those are the podcasts they're building. And the stories we get back are fantastic, because this is a magical medium in that somebody who cares can use their voice, which is truly human, to show that they care, and they can do it for years and years and years.
You know what I love though, Seth, is that when for me, curiosity is our mandate, is literally our slogan. And I'm just I love the word curious. It's interesting too. It's very special to me that you're on the show, because when I emailed you, and you get a ton of emails, I don't expect you to remember, but it was funny because we started talking really quick, and I talked about, I'm a new father, and I have my son and daughter. My son is 4 now. My daughter's 18 months. And you sent me this video back. You said, here you go, Ryan. But when I watch people get interviewed, and what I do love about podcasting is, it is long form, and you're not just getting a soundbite of that podcast. And the motivation for me is, when I watch an interview, even some of the interviews you've done, right? You show up and I'm like, he's been asked this question like 10,569 times. He's going to go on autopilot. Like it's there's some human nature involved with that. And for me, I just kind of said, I want to know about that person, like just the raw Seth Godin, not the, one thing I love about COVID-19 is, I love when I see Jimmy Kimmel at home with not the bright lights and not the fancy producers. I feel like it's made a little bit more of a freestanding game for everybody out there and kind of humanized it. So for you, when you're getting interviewed, do you ever feel this person, like they're not captivating what I would like them to captivate? Or do you just kind of say, not my business, I'm showing up as the guest, and I'm going to do my thing and take care and have a great life after, and check out my book?
First of all, you're the first person who's ever said to me, one thing I love about COVID-19. That's a great sentence. You should have that tattooed on your arm. Yeah, I am super fortunate in that I don't write books for a living and haven't for a very long time. I have no desire to trade anything for a book sale. And I'm not hustling it. If people don't want it, they don't want it. So that's never the case. My friend Simon wrote a book inspired by a book by James Cars called The Infinite Game, or Infinite and Finite Games. And an infinite game is a game you play to play, and a finite game is a game you play to win. Tennis is a finite game. So in tennis, when someone puts up a lob, you're sitting there saying to yourself, how do I slam this so the game is over?
Yeah.
And when you're playing catch with your 4-year-old, you're not trying to win catch. You're trying to play catch in a way that you get to keep playing catch. And that's how I view a podcast interview. I rarely find myself on autopilot. That's why these are so exhausting for me.
Yes.
Because I'm thinking about the question and saying, well, I have an autopilot answer, but what could I say that would help this interviewer get to where they are seeking to go for their audience? And I have to make that up in my head in like less than 3 seconds.
Of course.
That's why I'm a good podcast guest.
Yes.
Not because people have read my books, but because I'm trying to help the interviewer accomplish the interviewer's goals. I'm not trying to accomplish my goals.
Interesting. Yeah, I feel the audience loves, and I mean, we have had a lot of success on the podcast, and the listener feedback always goes the same thing. Ryan, we love the human to human element. It's like watching two old friends have a conversation, and you have an audience that's kind of in the corner and just kind of going through the motions of that. And I said, I don't do trickery in an interview. I talk to them as humans, and sometimes, it starts out really awkward, and I'm like, I better get this going soon, or it's gonna be a little mayday. And then other times it comes out of the gate, and I'm like, I'm just gonna shut up and let whatever happens happen today. And every I can honestly say this, and I'm sure you've heard this from your workshop people is somebody say, hey, are you more comfortable in episode 1 or 115 or 120? I just love that first 6 seconds. It's edgy, when that Zoom comes up or the Skype comes up. It's just, you sink or swim in that moment. And I think that is what's going to achieve growth. I know we're coming to the end of our time.
I just want to interrupt because it's not often that I get a chance to drop celebrity names, but I used to do a series of interviews for American Express back in the days of cable TV. And I had some great ones with Chris Anderson and a few other tech leaders. And then I had Richard Branson. Richard had a cold. And he was terrible. He did nothing to make my life better. And I learned so much from that interview because I understood from his point, if he's going to show up, he should show up. Yes. Or he can.
Yeah.
And then they hooked me up to interview Diane von Furstenberg, the fashion designer. And I was really nervous because I don't know anything really about the fashion industry. So I read both of her autobiographies. She has 2. And my audience was small business leaders. So the goal was how to learn from each one of these people's journeys when we're talking about small business. Like, so Tom Colicchio was a guest. He was great. So I started to talk to Diane about the economics of fragrance versus cosmetics, because this is a whole chapter.
Okay.
In one of her autobiographies.
Okay.
So she could really dive in on this.
Yes.
Not only hadn't she written her autobiography, she hadn't even read it. And she's like, in the interview, I don't know what you're talking about. and like, just one sentence, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I learned so much from that about how to maybe do more than my share as a guest.
Yes. Thank you for being empathetic. You do make the great point because, sometimes you knock off a bio for somebody and they're like, well, thanks. I didn't write it. It sounds really lovely, Ryan. I appreciate you on that. I still go back to the human to human. My last question for you, it is COVID-19 related because, of course there's a plethora of negative news, and here locally in Canada, we're shut down. We kind of went back to the original lockdown situation that we started with back in March. And of course, you jump on social media and people are talking about that. I'm a very glass half full. I'm not naive at the same token, but I always look for, opportunities in quote unquote darkness or tough times. And I did mention earlier, but I do feel, one benefit of the COVID-19 is that people have been forced to slow down. And I've had some lovely conversations with people that prior to COVID-19, I just would not have those types of deep intellectual conversations with. So for you, is there any silver lining that you could share with the audience that you say, hey, maybe you haven't thought about this? And I'm not walking you to your answer because maybe you say, Ryan, I hate COVID-19 and it all sucks. I don't know. I'm just asking the question and seeing kind of what your take is on it.
We're all going to die. And for the first time in my lifetime, everyone confronted that at the same time. And that knowledge helps people decide what's important. It helps them decide what is worth their time. That getting through another evening by watching 3 hours of Netflix. Why? So you get one step closer to the end. And just, persisting with something that's not working simply because a long time ago you thought it would. A lot of people are like, life's too short. And we have, we live in a world filled with indoctrination, with a caste system of unfairness. We have trauma. We have people who are deprived of opportunity. And we also have a magical technology that connects me to my new friend who lives 3,000 miles from here. And we have the ability to connect and open doors for people. And we got to decide what's worth doing in the time we've got. And I have seen that over and over again from the people who do these workshops. I've seen that from the people in my life. And so if we're going to come out of this better than we went into it, I hope it will be with more humanity and less of a hustle.
Oh, Seth, I just love this. This has made me feel so good today. I'm so happy to connect with you as a human, my friend, and I appreciate your time so much. I mean, my wife is an avid reader of your blog, by the way. She did tell me to say hi to Seth for me. I like his blog. So much love to the Team Holtz family. Seth, can I just get you to say, before we wrap everything up, can I just get you to say the Ryan Holtz Show podcast?
Just those 4 words?
Yeah, you can say, hi, I'm Seth Godin, and this is the Ryan Holtz Show podcast. However you want to spin it.
Hey, it's Seth Godin, and this is the Ryan Holtz podcast.
Thank you so much. And where can everybody find you if they don't already know, and your book and whatnot? I'm going to link everything in the show notes to make it very easy for people to check out the book, check out your blog, and everything and all things Seth.
There's 7,500 free blog posts at seths.blog, seths.blog, and you can see the workshops at akimbo.com, AKIMBO.
Perfect. And last but not least, Seth, is there anything I can do for you? I always love to ask this question.
You're already doing something every week with your show, over and over and over again. You're making things better by making better things. That's all we can hope for.
Thank you so much, Seth. Take care, my friend, and happy holidays.
Same to you. Happy New Year.
See you. Ciao.
Well done.
Bye-bye.